It was just a solo guy in his own apartment, cranking out the ugliest interface you can find. And yet, it was free and he captured fairly decent market. If you can figure out how to get the technology to do more work for you, then it's always going to be a function of how much more stuff you can do in 24-hour cycle. You should be able to produce more than your competition. Looking at the day-to-day stuff, the waste, the corporate waste of doing it by hand is going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is like number one opportunity for optimizing it by an automation. Of course, some jobs are going to be lost, 100%. There is no magic bullet. There is no money-making machine. Most of them are demo traps. AI is one of the most significant tools in many years. So if you're not using it, you are at a huge disadvantage.
What forms of leverage have been the most transformative in business?
So let's look at business as, conquering your market. Like, so you figured out what problem you're solving and you have a market in front of you. You see, all those potential clients. You look at the competition that already has a play in it, right? So how do you carve out a chunk of the market and claim the territory, right? So what are the tools that you have at your disposal to do that? Of course, people are important because, you cannot do it all by yourself. It's possible. Like if you look at Plenty of Fish, like in a dating game, it was just a solo guy in his own apartment, cranking out the ugliest interface you can find. And yet it was free and he captured fairly decent market and Match.com acquired him, right? His leverage was that it was free. And a lot of people wanted to have the opportunity to find someone from the dating perspective for free, because I think all of them are charging some crazy amount of money. But the likelihood that this could happen to anyone is fairly low. It's possible, but low. So you got to have a team. The stronger the team, the better, of course, just because you can accomplish a lot more with fewer people if they are really, really good. Technology, of course, is super important as well. If you can figure out how to get the technology to do more work for you, it's always going to be a function of how much more stuff you can do in 24-hour cycle. And you should be able to produce more than your competition. People will have different opinions on Musk as the persona, but when he was just like literally, spending nights at the factory just so he can produce more and pushing people to do that, it's a testament to that very thing, that you got to produce more than your competition to achieve more, whether it's content, whether it is, lines of code that produce something useful, that's always important. Of course, at the same time, everyone or founders really need to start thinking, how can I produce more by doing less, or less is more kind of thing, right? In my experience, I always think like, what is the minimum amount of steps that we can do as a business to get more attention of potential customers? Since we're talking about automation, that becomes super important, because you got to figure out what can you do that will just run on its own and replace human capital and let you achieve the same results. And clearly there are things that can be done. Like, for example, having some semi-smart or really smart agent that just keeps cranking out content that gets posted on, your blog, X, Medium, whatever, or having some kind of smart system that will initiate conversations with prospects just by reaching out and saying, here's what we do, and starts listening for responses via email and maintain this conversation, kind of leading it to the way where the next thing would be to have a phone call, could actually schedule the call and just, have someone on the phone with the prospect to close the deal. So those things are super important in the new age that we're entering with AI agents and assistants and automations. I think the rules of the game will not change. It's still going to be the same thing, people and technology, and really understanding how to crack the market. But the rules for that are changing. There are new mediums, there are new ways that people prefer to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
With younger generations, my observation is that email is just not as important anymore, right?
Yeah. If you're referring to younger than 20, like they're not in the workforce, they're not having to,
like, if that's your audience,
you,
right? Forget about email. It was this funny TikTok where a lady, she says, well, someone just approached me and said that you look so good, like, can I have your Instagram? And she's like, kiddo, I'm 45. And then he says, oh, can I have your email then?
Give me your fax number.
Right, exactly.
So then I guess if you're looking at it as who can achieve more with less, where should people look for the best opportunities to automate? Because most people are not in the frame of thinking about those opportunities, because usually it's hire someone, outsource, or
Hmm.
whatever. But if you now are dealing with the opportunity to automate, where do you look for those opportunities that are going to give you the most leverage? How would you recommend people think through this process to find the highest leverage points?
It's a great question. So let's look at some hypotheticals, whether you are in a service business or product business. Content is going to be important pretty much everywhere, right? You got to produce content because more than likely people will respond to you just by first seeing what you are, what you have to offer, recognizing you as an authority in whatever space you're in, right? So to establish that authority, it could be that someone recommends you, like, hey, they do a great job. And that will remain for years to come. Since the market is huge, relying on the referrals may not work if you really want to scale. Like if you really want to scale, you have to tap into the mediums that people use to find information, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So in order to do that, you have to generate content. You kind of have to be in the game by adding your 2 cents. And the content generation is one of the top opportunities that comes to mind for that businesses should explore from the from relying on automations that can produce this content with minimal involvement by humans.
Mm. What
Okay,
examples can you give then? I guess you could create fully generated content, but there has to be some human direction
there has to be
or
some human direction.
curation.
Right, exactly. So you have to identify the goals. What is it you want to accomplish? What voice you want to have? What tone you're talking about? What subjects you want to bring up? Those are the kind of the guardrails that you set up that essentially establishes the vector. And then sourcing the ideas, you could have an automation that regularly goes out, scouts for existing conversations or what people have to say. And this could be anywhere. It could just go out and look for YouTube videos and analyze transcripts. It can routinely check posts on Reddit or LinkedIn groups. Good old Google searches for whatever is relevant. Finding relevant content in communities that focus on your subject areas can be more productive by going specifically to resources and sites that specialize in that. I think as time goes on, let's say you created some kind of automation that can generate this content. Of course, initially you want to have some kind of control over that. And then as you go and you feed your changes and your adjustments back into the engine, so it starts becoming smarter and smarter and knows exactly what you want, then this will start decreasing your involvement to produce quality content. And then it could become completely autonomous over time. In my experience, like I had a very fun session with ChatGPT on generating images,
Hmm.
specifically like badges that are awarded for getting things done. And then over the 2 days that I was just going back and forth and generating, it really understood the style, how I want to convey ideas through badges, and it was just like pure fun. Similar thing could be happening with text-based content. Right now it's very immature, but as time goes on, it's going to be the similar type of process for video content, because Sora is
Hmm.
already pretty good, but it's pretty far from generating quality content that would be complementary to someone's brand or identity or service. So content generation is definitely one. Another area is just looking at the day-to-day stuff where the time is being spent. For example, established businesses, they're sort of stuck in the process of just processing their invoices. You send an invoice as a vendor to a company that you provide a service for. They have someone who opens up that email, opens up that PDF or Excel or whatever, and gets the information from the invoice, looks up purchase order number, cross references in their ERP or whatever system, and then puts in that invoice for accounting to be paid with some terms. And if you multiply that by the number of businesses and the number of business that is being done that old way, the waste, the corporate waste of doing it by hand is going to be in the maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is like number one opportunity for optimizing it, where it can be done extremely efficiently with a very high degree of accuracy by an automation. And then the number of examples for this type of thing, it's huge. For simple things kind of done old school where no one even knew that it's possible of doing it differently, it's skyrocketing. And then that's a great place to start, because you can start optimizing the way you're conducting business
Mm-hmm.
with a very little investment.
So, what would people do? Let's say they have a thing in mind.
Mhm.
Maybe it's emails, maybe it's invoices, and they want to automate it. But there's just so many tools out there, so many different companies saying that they
Yeah,
can promise an agent or an automation. And maybe people don't even know the difference between an automation, an RPA, and an AI
right.
agent and an AI assistant. Where do they start? And how should they approach this problem?
That's a great question. For someone who knows nothing about automations and AI assistants, that can be a very challenging place to start, right? If they are kind of a self-starter and just want to learn it all by themselves, of course, you got to spend some time just going through some training, or at least just getting a general idea and taking a course on Udemy or whatever. But this is like an expanding universe, because as you're taking a month of learning something, during that month some new frameworks and tools will appear. So it's like you're going to be at this chasing target that it's very hard to catch or hit. If you really want to optimize your business, doing your homework on what tools exist will be helpful, because at least when you start having a conversation with an external consultant or your own R&D department, you will have an idea what they're talking about. But when it comes to selecting a tool, I think identifying ones that would allow you to model real world business processes is going to be important. But how do you tell if you can model a real world process, right? Well, asking ChatGPT for the limitations of any given tool is a good place to start. Like, for example, Zapier. Everybody knows Zapier. But with Zapier, when you create an automation, it has to start with a trigger. So it has to start with something that activates that automation. Well, what if my automation doesn't start with the trigger? I just want to start with a condition, or I want to start with an action, like I want to look up something from the database and then wait for something to happen. Why does it have to start with a trigger? I think that's a fairly big limitation. It didn't stop them from growing to have like thousands of integrations, but when it comes to implementing a real world scenario, I believe it is a fairly big limitation. Right? Some automations do not have to start with the trigger. Like, for example, I want my automation, to wake up every single day, check the emails, identify the ones that are important, create a summary, create a to-do list, and then send me an email or, a Slack message saying, this is the top of the things that you need to focus on today, based on what I found in your mailbox, right? There is no trigger there. The trigger, is going to be like the scheduled automation that wakes up every day. So what I was getting at is, figuring out what tool would allow you to model your process as closely as possible based on how things are done in the tool is going to be quite important. And then to know if you can do this is basically understanding what limitations any given tool has.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of frameworks and various tools, a lot of frameworks that exist, they will focus primarily on the technical crowd. Like, for example, LangChain is super popular. Like, LangChain gives you an ability to create this agentic systems or set up AI assistants and just do a lot of different things. Can you do that can you use LangChain as a non-developer? No, there's no chance. You go to there, but it is a great tool for developers. If you're not a developer and you hear LangChain, you log on to their website. It's nothing but a bunch of Python and JavaScript code. There are some additional systems that were developed that use LangChain and provide some kind of visual front end for that, but they're still somewhat technical. The way we did it is actually pretty cool, because you can use LangChain and Flowrunner without having a deep technical understanding of how it works, and
Mm-hmm.
it's still you will be able to create an agentic system. So that's pretty cool. Now, what will people do? Let's say you found this framework and you automate an area. What will people do? Of course, some jobs are going to be lost, 100%, right? Because that's just a natural uh, progression. If we go back to, like, 90s, when a lot of systems were being developed, service-oriented architectures closer, but by the end of 90s, early 2000s, and APIs, and you can create, enterprise service bus, just connecting different pieces together. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. You create a system that frees up human resources from doing it manually to an automated way. Now it's even bigger opportunity to optimize it further. So some jobs are going to be lost. People will repurpose themselves and do something else in the future. A lot of jobs are going to be lost. So I think we're kind of on the path to universal income, where things are so optimized where the humans are just like chilling and just getting a paycheck just because they're there, and you can spend time with your kids. I think that's inevitable, because the way we're doing things now, there's certainly a better way to do this.
Interesting.
But going back to identifying the right technology, that's a tough call. That's a really tough call if you're starting from, like, perspective where you know nothing about it. Okay. Hiring consultants is certainly an option. If you found a team that really knows what they're doing, that they can demonstrate that they have optimized and automated processes for their clients, getting the referrals, checking with them, just talking, how good the experience was, kind of going the old school way. It's a proven option. I'm sure you're going to get somewhere.
From a higher level perspective, if you wanted to compare tools, what are the biggest things people aren't even aware of that they need to think about? Maybe it could be cost down the line, because maybe you build an automation or an agent or something, and at that level you start using it at, it's fine, but then when it grows to the scale you need to use it, it's super expensive, and now you're stuck in this platform because you can't switch or whatever.
Cost is definitely very important, right? Because you need to understand that when you start at the free tier, everything looks great and rosy, and next year is going to be like 25 a month, and then $50 a month, and then $70 a month. But if your business is growing and your automation is doing a lot of things, and it's becoming more and more in demand, then you will go to tens of thousands of actions per month, and you'll be spending hundreds or thousands of dollars. Another thing, just look at the business policies. Like, if you subscribe to an annual plan, and then you just want to change it to go to somewhere else, are you going to be getting a refund if you cancel in the middle of your annual subscription? With most platforms, the answer is no. You will not be getting a refund, right? It's a fairly brutal business practice, so you got to know that. Now, things to look for besides the cost is, how easy is it to augment or extend the system with some customizations, right? Because you could be looking into a platform that has a lot of integrations. Integrations are definitely very important. That they will make it so much easier to automate whatever the business process that you have. But you will be running into a scenario where you just want something to be done somewhat differently, or do something extra that the platform does not do out of the box. So understanding how easy is it to extend the system with some customization is going to be very important, because very few systems will be giving you out of the box exactly what you need. Very few. Another thing to look into is how much control you can have over the system as time goes on. So let's say you start automating your business and it goes well, and you really see the benefits. But as it grows, you do more and more automations, and at some point, you just want to say, look, I don't want to have any dependency on somebody else's server and platform. I want to run it locally. I want to have 100% degree of control over my data and the process. The platform that I'm kind of marrying into, does it support a mode where I can run it locally on my machines in my data center, in my AWS or Google Cloud account? For a lot of platforms, the answer is no. Like if you look at Zapier and Make, you cannot run Zapier on your own servers. N8N and Flowrunner are probably the only exceptions to that rule. You can run N8N on your own machine. You can run Flowrunner on your own machine. And that's a huge advantage because you will have complete control over everything with very few limitations, because you basically have unlimited version running on your machine.
So maybe you're interested in buying a ready-made automation or AI agent, because those
Yeah.
exist now. There's
Yeah.
marketplaces popping up and everyone's selling them as if there's like some money machine. So
Oh my
what's the
God.
truth? Is it actually that effective? What do people need to know about this?
The thing is, it's a demo trap. Most of them are demo traps because they work great for the demo, but a true automation, let's say the one that is supposed to replace a human, it needs to deal with so many little things that typically are very hard to program and think through in advance, right? So when you see all those videos with like these huge diagrams that do so many things, yes, they will execute certain path quite well. But in a real business case, there will be a lot of either edge cases, the ones that will have to be worked on and the automation has to be improved or programmed to handle. And typically it does not, or sometimes it is impossible just because there may be so many edge scenarios that are just very hard to think through. So there is no magic bullet. There is no, money-making machine, because imagine if there was. So let's talk about stock trading, like AI stock trading. If it were to be true, wouldn't everyone have an AI stock trading agent and everyone would get rich? It's just not how the market works, right? So it's just impossible by definition. First of all, there is no way to predict the market. Whoever says that's not true, they will not be spending their time creating videos on how to do stock trading with AI. They would probably be like own their own island somewhere in Caribbean and just chill, if that were true. So I'm super skeptical whenever I see a video that says, this will make you super rich. That's a money-making machine. No, there's no such thing.
I mean, there's some that are like a bot that will take your calls for you, or some sort of sales agent. How would you approach those? Like, is there a level of customization that you can expect to have to do? Or is it like, oh, I'll buy this thing and suddenly I don't have to touch sales ever again. I don't have to touch a phone ever again.
Let's talk about sales agents, like automated sales agents, right? Let's say that there is this shrink wrap sales agent that can just sell. Ask yourself a question. Is it possible to create a universal sales agent? There is like, gazillion number of products on Amazon, right? Or Alibaba or whatever. Can you have a universal sales agent that you just point it to an Amazon product and it will just be an expert in selling it? No, it's impossible. Every single product has its own pitch and advantages, qualities that you need to know about, how it compares with other products and where you're better and how it can solve the problem. So the problem of creating a universal sales agent is so complex, I think it is impossible. You can have some kind of guidelines that a good salesperson should follow, but it will be lacking the actual knowledge about the product you're selling or the service you're selling. And I believe having that knowledge is super critical in order to be successful, because you can take a salesperson that sells used cars, and he is fantastic, right? And you put them into enterprise sales for software. Will they be good? No, just because with whatever the techniques that they use will not work here. Same thing goes with an AI agent that is your sales rep. That will not work. It's good to create a video that just causes a lot of hype and says this thing will just sell anything and everything. But in reality, it's going to be a flop.
Yeah, I mean, even in the case like it works in that one very specific use case, like you
Yes,
mentioned, all the edge cases are a mess. And if you don't know how it's built and you don't understand the logic behind it, it's impossible
yeah,
to really make it
it
work.
is impossible, of course. But let's say if you do want to automate this a part of your sales process,
Hmm.
creating an AI agent that facilitates the process and is knowledgeable about your product or service is possible, but it needs to be developed from within. Like, can it be a product off the shelf? Maybe, but it will be maybe about 20% of where it needs to be, because a lot of the knowledge and training, it's not just the knowledge about the product. It's perhaps every company should have its own voice. Every company will have their own ICP, right? The ideal customer profile with its own demographics, with its own geographic area, with its own interests, right? Like, if you're selling something and the audience that you go to attract loves, for instance, football, it's going to be good to train your AI agent to be aware of all the recent games, just so you can have a meaningful conversation from the chit chat perspective before you get to the business, to kind of predispose the prospect to you, so you don't seem like, just like straight to the business salesperson. That is possible. And then those details would make a lot of difference when it comes to having something that really works.
So essentially, from the very start point, it's understanding your ability to create an automation versus outsourcing to someone who's a consultant, an expert. Then, in the case you're making it, it's understanding the differences between the tools so that you can choose the right one, meaning, does it fit the business needs? Is it scalable in price? Is it scalable in maintenance and in customization, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, if you need to
Mm-hmm.
change things? And then it's deciding which aspects to automate based on how repetitive they are, or what areas could give you the most leverage. So, what are you spending the most time on that doesn't require human involvement? And then what's next? Say you've done this all, you've automated the parts of your business that were the big time sucks. What do you see a business that's been optimally cleaned up and automated look like? And what work is left behind for the people in that business?
The creative part, if whether it's product or service, there are still tasks that will remain, that are 100% human, right? The ones that will uh, make the product or service better, the ones that will just evoke new emotions from the customers, that will just continue getting excited about your product or service, right? Whatever the automation is doing, there will still be some involvement from the perspective of tuning and making it more personal, and then making and optimizing it to be more efficient. But whatever's left, it's still a fairly big chunk, because you want your products to evolve, to become better and better. You still have to listen to the customers. You still have to continue providing incremental improvements. Or you can just start scaling to a larger geographic area. You may start thinking about, derivative type of product that's sort of going to be an upsell. So
So, like the big strategy,
exactly,
essentially. Yeah.
right. Whoever's starting, it's good to have a larger game plan in mind, like where the end goal is for automation. But you got to start small and then make it incrementally better and better. And we talked about content generation, which is a great place to start. But from the sales automation perspective, it is real. Like, with the tools available today, what would a basic automation look like? Well, the way I would do it is I would just start that automation that periodically wakes up as frequently as you'd like, and just does the searches for leads.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be by using LinkedIn APIs, using Apollo, using whatever the tools are that provide you that kind of searches. So you get a list of contacts, right? Your automation verifies those contacts, again, just by using the searches or whatever the tools available. Like, is that email real or not? Oh, well, you do the analysis of understanding what their space is and where they are at. You check if they have written any articles. You basically use AI to compose a text that is not just like a cold text, like, hey, we're selling X, but something that would get their attention. And it's possible. AI is really good in terms of crafting those. You send out an email and you repeat this process through all the contacts, and then you go into, those triggers that wait for the response. Because if someone responds, then you just can maintain the conversation completely automatically. You may not know that you're actually talking to an AI agent. If it looks real, if it's really talking about something that has a lot of substance. So having that kind of automation that is intelligent, that is aware of the surrounding context that's relevant to me as the recipient of that cold email, that could work. And at scale, it could really generate business. So creating those is 100% possible. It will take a little bit of work. Do those exist off the shelf? I'm not aware of a single automation, and I've seen a lot of videos and looked at a lot of templates. I have not seen a single one that would actually do just that and would do it well.
Do you think it's possible for someone to make that and sell it, or do you think it requires custom build every single time? Or is there in between where there's a template starting point and you can plug in your own specific needs?
It's somewhere in between. So there has to be a general skeleton of that automation, the general flow. However, the knowledge about your product, and that's a big knowledge, like how is it different? Because the person could be coming back and saying, tell me more, or we're using system X, how are you different? Can you show me how you can save money? Right? There could be a lot of questions that would require knowledge about your own product or service. So whatever you buy off the shelf, you would have to enrich it with that information.
That's interesting too, because if you think about it, your main involvement is now training the automation agent on your business. So you have to be very clear on what your business does, who they serve, their biggest pain points, everything.
Absolutely.
And I noticed a lot of businesses maybe don't have that level of clarity, especially at the start, and maybe they're still refining or they're still understanding their markets. Then I guess you could also use an agent to help you research and refine your positioning. So is that also a possibility then?
Absolutely. Anytime you have to do some kind of research work, I think you'd be doing a great disservice to yourself if you don't use AI for any kind of research work. Previously, people would just start Googling and just seeing what's out there. Since the information base of any major LLM these days is just as big as Google's knowledge base, then you go straight to LLM to ask questions. That's where you do the research. Can you automate that research? Of course. But it's going to be more interactive because you will have to make some decisions on what information is relevant and what is not, because AI will not really have an idea about the relevance, or at least initially.
It's so interesting. It's like taking the traditional, I guess, operator role and turning it into more of a director. Instead of being the technician and executing everything yourself, you're just managing and giving direction. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You're really orchestrating. AI is one of the most significant tools that entered business productivity space in many years. It's the most significant. So if you're not using it, you are really going to be a huge disadvantage compared to competition who does.
I have two things. One is I know people who are still haven't even touched ChatGPT because they think it's stupid and it gives them bad answers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say to those people?
I don't know. When email was just invented, right? I'm sure there were people that said, I'm just going to write my handwritten note and put it in the mailbox just because I don't trust this thing. I don't know if anyone said that. I'm sure there were. I think those who has this kind of reaction to AI or ChatGPT these days are probably going to be people who really trusted horse carriages more than cars when they were just invented. Seriously. Right?
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing. Of course, AI could give wrong answers, right? I had personal experience, which is kind of funny. Okay, my kid is supposed to read a couple of chapters every day, right? So I think it was Percy Jackson, one of the Percy Jackson books that I haven't read. So he's like, okay, I've read it 100%. and I go to ChatGPT and I say, okay, give me a list of 10 questions and answers on Percy Jackson, book 5 or whatever, right? Chapters 1 to 20. And it generates a list of questions like, okay, well, let's see how well you read this book. And I like read the question 1 and I see the answer and he's like, it's not in the book. And I said, you didn't read it? Like, yes, I did. And I'm insisting that he hasn't because it's right there. The question is right there.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not in the book. So I start flipping the book and I just looking for the keywords that are like, it's not there. And so I go to ChatGPT. It's like, are you sure about question 1? It's like, oh, my bad. It's actually not it. And then
Yeah.
it was embarrassing and funny, but it could give you wrong answers. But
Yeah.
if you keep that in mind, you could still have very productive session on whatever the research that you need to.
In the in the product design realm, because this is where I was also interested. So of course you can, optimize your whole business process. But from the perspective of designing a product, maybe it's a new software or maybe it's an app or whatever. AI is obviously becoming more and more integrated into new products. So how do you see that playing out with automation and designing products so that they're already considering these things, like already considering these processes that we would now automate if we found them? And what implication does that have on, I guess, the startup world? Because as a startup founder, you now no longer need maybe the same level of capital to pour into developers, or maybe funding is not as necessary. So I don't know, how do you see this space folding out right now?
So there are two areas where AI fits in here. One is using AI as a tool to make it easier for your users to get things done in your product. And that trend is dominating right now because you look at a lot of products that are coming out and there is AI powered this, AI powered that, like generating descriptions, providing some kind of assistance to do things, right? And it's more on the tooling side where AI becomes sort of a tool that makes things easier, not necessarily generating the creative part, right? Well, of course, you can say, well, generating descriptions is the creative part, fine, to that extent, but not to the extent of doing something more major. So if you are designing a product and you can incorporate AI to make it easier for your users to get things done, you absolutely have to do this, because if you don't do it, your competition will. But I have not seen a lot of products that are coming out now where it goes beyond that. There are a lot of examples with agentic apps where they create AI agents that can book travel and check availability and all of that. The practical application of this, I have not seen it materializing. And that's once again, that demo trap where it works really well for that particular case. As a general tool, it starts failing.
So is that like agents as a service, I guess, almost?
Yes, let's think about it, right? Let's say you want to travel to Rome.
Yeah.
And you look up flights and they seem expensive. And you just want to say, look, I'm interested in that specific airline in that specific time slot, and I'm willing to pay that much. And when you book, make sure to use my frequent travel flyer number or whatever, and book it when it becomes available. Is there such a tool? I'm not aware. Maybe there is, but that would
Yeah.
be great. That just periodically checks for any kind of flight discounts or fare wars that start, and it just books it for you. But at the same time, it knows that these are the dates that you're looking to travel. You will also need a rental car. You may want to have a hotel of a certain quality, and it starts kind of looking for all those things, sort of preparing the full itinerary. And at the same time, it knows that you're really into like food festivals, and it says, oh, 1 hour south of Rome, there's going to be this great food festival where they bake fantastic pizzas, and it also slaps it in there. That's the kind of experience that would really be fantastic, right? It hasn't happened. Will it happen? Yeah, over time it will, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. So agent as a service is kind of starting to emerge, but the issue, like you said, is it's more like a demo trap. So now there's more and more people who are trying to capitalize on building agents for different businesses, and they're trying to sell themselves as consultants. As a consultant, if you want to, have consistent cash flow. You're either selling new product to a new person every single time, or you have to find a way to make it into a recurring revenue model. In that case, I guess it would be a maintenance sort of function. But how does that work? Like, is there any platforms that you can see hosting this sort of format? Because I have yet to see somewhere where you can just design custom automation and then still charge in a recurring revenue model for maintenance. Like, do you know what I mean? Is this something that's going to be possible? Because I know people who are starting to look into this, and it's like this mindset of how do I make this a subscription model but still custom to the business is a
Sure.
problem I keep coming into.
We do that. We do that. So with Flowrunner, you can create a flow, an automation, publish it into our marketplace for a fee. You can do it for free, but you can assign a fee. And anytime someone buys that automation and installs to run it, we broker the transaction, keep our commission, and you get the payout. So this way you can do the investment to create something fantastic and wonderful that's general purpose or solves a specific problem, and distribute it through our marketplace. But I'm not aware of any other platform that does this, that has an open marketplace that allows people to distribute and sell their automations. So I share your vision that this is would be good to have, and we're actually offering it. And it's a fairly new feature, so we haven't really seen it taking it off. But I think as time goes on, it's definitely something that will be quite in demand.
Yeah. And if you could give everyone in the world an experiment to do for 30 days,
Yeah.
what would it be?
I think the simplest thing that would be relevant to everyone, and it doesn't have to be 30 days would be plenty to make it happen. But, in terms of like the time that we'll go to, do some basic education and learning and so on, the use case that I described earlier, where you have an automation that in the morning before you start your day goes out, grabs whatever's in your email box, processes those emails, and creates a task list for you in the order of priority. Because my mailbox gets very busy every time I start my day, and it would take a little bit of time to just go through and understand what's important, what's not. But if I have that task list that tells me, these are the top 3 things that you have to take care of because they're urgent, creating such an automation would be fairly straightforward. And in there, you basically use the integration with, Gmail or whatever the email system that you use, and an AI assistant that processes all those emails, that generates the task list for you. And that would be a great starting point to do a lot more other more complex things.
Yeah. Awesome. So I guess anyone who's overwhelmed, what's the first place they should start if they wanted to start this first automation?
Looking into their day-to-day activities and trying to automate those would probably be more complex if you haven't really done any. From the automation perspective, just to learn how it works. On our side, the build your first automation really creates an automation of like 4 steps. It's grabbing news articles based on a query. Like you basically say, for this search query, give me the latest news articles, and you can identify the sources. Then it goes over the list of those articles, sends it to AI to create a summary of what's going on in the world today. And that AI returns that list, and you can just send it to yourself via email. And that's the basic automation that we recommend people to start when we have like a very detailed walkthrough how to implement it. That's a good starting point, just because it gives you an idea of how you build an automated process that consists of individual steps and how to use the tool. And then once you kind of get the basic hang of the mechanics of creating it, then many other things become a lot simpler to digest and implement.
I think that'll give everyone something to chew on for the next 30 days, hopefully. And hopefully they'll come
Absolutely.
out of this with something that makes their life a little bit easier and their
Right.
mornings a little bit less stressful.
My pleasure.